What's good, YouTube? It's Justice I Used to Be Paying. Today I'm back with another video. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining why Kendrick Lamar's GNX might just make rap great again. But before I get into that, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Do all those things. It helps me out a ton. Recently, Kendrick Lamar dropped an album titled GNX, and this album did extremely well commercially. It sold over 300K first week, it went #1, and it occupied 7 of the top 10 Billboard Hot 100 spots. So this was all very impressive, especially if you add into the context that this was a surprise album and nobody really saw this coming. So overall, very successful album, very good for Kendrick Lamar. But I'm going to explain to you why this album is actually good for rap as a whole, and rap the genre and hip hop culture just as a whole. And no, it's not because Kendrick's the greatest. We glaze Kendrick. Yes, Kendrick. Like, I'm not going to do that in this video. You might take it as that, and if you do, then I guess that's just on you, but whatever. This album being so successful commercially is really good for rap because it's a very regional sounding project. Very regional sounding. This is probably the most West Coast sounding project that Kendrick Lamar has dropped since he's become a mainstream, worldwide phenomenon artist all over everywhere. He can't go anywhere anymore. This is the most West Coast his music has sounded on a single project, probably since he's become that. Like, GNX is unapologetically and aggressively West Coast in the way that it sounds. So the fact that a regional album in hip hop can have this much success is really good for rap culture. Now, it's Kendrick Lamar, and really he could probably drop just about anything and be successful. He could probably drop a country album and it would still do crazy numbers, but just the fact that it's a West Coast regional sounding project is really good for the space. A regional album having this much success in the modern era is really good for the space because this has been something that's been kind of missing from the top of rap. Now, it's always going to exist in rap. Regional sounds are always going to be a thing, but when you get to the very, very top of rap, it's been kind of homogenized over the last decade. That trap sound that originated out of Atlanta in the early 2010s has been so dominant that pretty much everyone has had to adjust and adapt to that sound in order to be one of the top guys in rap, one of the highest sellers. All the guys that are on the come up, guys like a Travis Scott who came up during the 2010s, guys like a Kodak who came up during the 2010s, and I'm not even going to mention all 300 Atlanta rappers that I could mention who come out of Atlanta with that exact sound, or even the guys that were at the top. The guys that were at the very top already before this sound really even took over the space still had to adapt to this new sound. The Kendricks, the Drakes, the Coles, the Waynes, the Kanyes even, Nicki Minaj, they all had to adapt to this 2010 trap Atlanta sound. We still had regional sounds in the 2010s, but towards the middle and the end of the decade especially, everything became a bit homogenized, and it really stands out when you compare it to previous eras of rap. More in particular, the 90s or early 2000s. Now, I'm not going to do the whole boomer take, oh, rap was so much better back then, rap needs to go back. I'm not going to do that. But we definitely did have a bunch of different regions providing us with different sounds that were all having massive amounts of success. Like, you could hear some music on the radio, and within about 30 seconds to a minute, you could probably tell or have a very good educated guess as to where that sound originated out of. Of course, we had, the East Coast and the West Coast. The West Coast was doing the whole G-Funk type of thing. East Coast was doing more of that boom bap style. But even at the South, even when we go to the South at the time, which was a little underdeveloped in comparison to those coasts in the 90s, but towards the late 90s, they kind of picked it up. But we had Outkast, right? And even if you look deeper into the 90s, or not deeper into the 90s, deeper into the South, you had Memphis doing their own thing with that weird horrorcore rap stuff, 3 6 Mafia type of stuff. And then you had Louisiana with Juvenile and Lil Wayne and the Hot Boys. And then as time progresses on, we even had Chicago popping out with Common and Ye and Twista, and then even St. Louis with, Nelly in the 2010s. All these different parts of the country, all these different regions were having massive success with their own sound. Pretty much every major region filled with black people had at least some success in mainstream hip hop for the most part. Not every region, but most regions, right? And this was kind of lost in the 2010s, as the Atlanta trap sound of the 2010s really just took over everything, not just rap, but just everything music in general, everything pop culture, as rap was on fire during the 2010s and just took over all of pop culture. Everyone was trying to get a piece of rap. We had, Taylor Swift getting features from Future, and Ed Sheeran wanting a feature from Future. We had the Migos working with what's the old boy name? Calvin Harris was his name. The Migos were working with Calvin Harris. You remember the Slide song. Drake was the biggest artist in the world. Now, obviously, Drake's not from Atlanta, but he adapted to that 2010s trap Atlanta sound. And everyone was just trying to get a piece of that 808s and melodic auto-tune wave, right? Just listen to a song like Drunk in Love by Beyonce. That's literally a Future song. Like, I'm not exaggerating. That is a Future song. Drunk in Love. That was given to Beyonce. Go listen to the Future reference track. It sounds kind of crazy to hear him sing it, but yeah, like everyone was trying to get a piece of this. Everyone was. The entire genre of like male R&B in the mainstream space is still suffering from the 2010s trap sound. Like they all kind of sound like Future. Like they all have some Future in their game if they're a mainstream R&B star right now. They have that melodic auto-tune stuff with the very toxic lyrics and all that. Like everyone was trying to get a piece of that ATL trap sound in the 2010s. What became a theme of the genre in the 2010s was guys from places with distinct regional sounds changing and morphing their sounds to cater towards what was already popular once they reached a certain level of notoriety and clout. And the best example of this is the Atlantification of the Chicago drill scene. Chicago drill in the 2010s, the early 2010s to be specific, is one of the most unique upstart subgenres that rap has ever seen. Obviously, because of the antics and like the real life tragedies that are tied to the music, but even just in terms of the sound, it just sounded completely different to really anything that we had heard before in rap. And if you listen to Chicago drill music pre-2016 and post-2016, you can see that there's a massive difference in the beats, really, and just the sound as a whole. Now, a lot of the production from that Chicago drill scene in those early years was pretty rough. All right, a lot of it was kind of trash, I'm not gonna lie, but it sounded different. It was a regional sound. You could tell what it was as soon as the song played. Oh, this is immediately, oh yeah, Chicago drill. But that kind of changed. And of all the artists that ended up surviving really that drill scene and that drill era and making it out and becoming bigger than just, a guy from that drill scene, they all adapted. They all changed their sound. The most notorious of this being, Chief Keef. Chief Keef was really the first guy from the Chicago drill scene to kind of leave the scene and change his sound and start making more Atlanta sounding music. And he left the drill scene really before the bubble even popped on the scene. But then we also got a guy like G Herbo, who, if you check his music pre-like 2016, there's a drastic change in his production, really. There's really a massive Atlantification of G Herbo when you check and listen to his music from the very beginning of his career up until even in this modern day. And even if you look at a guy like King Von wasn't out during like the peak of the Chicago drill scene. He was in jail. But like when he came out and started making music, his music in terms of production and in terms of how he raps sounds like Atlanta music. Even though he's rapping like Chicago drill stuff even harder than some of these other guys, his music is very Atlantified. Everything about it. And the biggest offender of this, by far, is Lil Durk. If you didn't know anything about Lil Durk pre-2017, it wouldn't have been ridiculous to assume that he was one of these new wave Atlanta rappers like Gunna, like Lil Baby, like 21 Savage, that were all coming up and just dominating the music scene. Like that change that he made in his career to adapt to this more modern sound is probably the best thing that's ever happened to his career in the long run. Like it took him from a guy that, he was cool, he had some moments, he had some songs, but he wasn't really one of the top dogs and really was just going to be a guy that was remembered as one of the names in that Chicago drill scene that didn't really go anywhere afterwards, maybe like akin to like Lil Reese today. And it transformed him into one of the hottest rappers in rap over the last like 5 years or so up until his arrest. I believe that this kind of wave of Atlanta trap taking over everything really came to be due to the fact that technology rapidly got better and the ability to access music became much easier. The internet did exist before the 2010s, but with the explosion of social media in the 2010s, during this time, you just had way more access to music from different places, including the movements of music from areas that maybe hadn't become super popular yet, but were on their way to becoming extremely popular. Because back in the day, you really only heard the very, very top stuff of a region. Like you only heard the very, very best or the very, very hottest things to come from Atlanta if you were from LA. And if you were from New York, you only heard the very, very most popular things to come from California, if that. Like you didn't really get that much from other regions. But the result of this newfound discoverability is that this generation kind of picked a sound for the whole generation while it was on the come up with things like, the early Migos mixtapes and Young Thug and his early days throughout his, Atlanta career. But most importantly, the guy who really kind of set this off was Future and his early work from the decade of the 2010s. So as a whole, this generation kind of came together on the internet from everywhere, all throughout the country, and anointed this one sound. And once it became really, really big and started to hit the top of the Billboard, started to debut at the top of the charts, everyone kind of assimilated. The rapidly improving technology also made it easier to imitate what was going on at the top of the charts. As time has gone on, more and more can regular people make good sounding music. You don't need a massive budget to make good music. You don't need a record label behind you. You don't even need access to a studio. All you really need is a phone, maybe a laptop or a desktop. That's really all you need. And combine the improving technology, making it easier for regular people to make music, alongside the explosion of social media, and you get these guys who are up and coming rappers and they want to make music, and they're not necessarily being influenced by the rapper in their city who maybe can do a show with like 300 people there and have a pretty decent night. They're being influenced by the guys on the internet. Why would I pay attention to you when I can pay attention to the guy with 3 million views on SoundCloud and 1 million views on his music video on YouTube? Why would I be influenced by you instead of the guy who's really doing what I want to do? You're doing well, you're doing better than me, don't get me wrong, but like I want to be there. I don't necessarily want to be there. So that's how we end up with a lot of these guys who end up being called, the sons of Future and Young Thug, with, people like Playboy Carti, even though he's from Atlanta, or Lil Uzi, or Trippie Redd, and even the guys who came up after them, shortly after them, the guys like Yeet, the guys like Ken Carson, Destroy Lonely. That's how we end up with this kind of chain of guys influenced by the internet and the guys on top of the internet. Yet now with that phase kind of ending, this album GNX is restoring that feeling of coastal pride in your sound. These sounds and regions of America never went away. They never died, but they were all forced to bend the knee and assimilate once they reached a certain height of popularity. This album encourages staying true to your roots and making music that represents directly where you're from. What we're seeing right now is the decentralization of rap. Rap is kind of on a downswing just a bit in terms of its numbers. Country and pop are really the big dogs right now, so rap kind of has to fall back and reinvent itself. It's kind of just licking its wounds at the moment, and you don't have to adhere to what everyone else is doing in order to be successful right now, because we don't really know what the next big wave is, right? Like, you don't have to copy and paste the authoritarian 2010s Atlanta regime anymore in order to be successful. A major example of this is somebody like Boss Mandilo, who has a very simple but catchy style of making music that has caught flames everywhere. Like, if you go to pretty much any club in America with people like us, you're gonna hear probably at least 3 or 4 Boss Mandilo songs. Like, he just gets play everywhere. And it's not like he's doing a bunch of revolutionary stuff, but it just doesn't sound like the rest of hip hop, really. Same with somebody, this is going to be kind of random, but somebody like OT7 Kwani out of Philly. Like, we're getting more and more bubbles of regions building up with their own sauce and style, and there isn't a re-education process that has to happen for them once they get super successful. Right now, we got the Cali scene in terms of SoCal and NorCal. Of course, we got the Atlanta scene still. We got Philly. We got parts of Florida. We got Detroit. We got Flint. We got New Orleans. All of these places building up and giving us new stars. Rap is at its best when it's super creative and super diverse. And don't get me wrong, I love the 2010s, okay? Because that's the time where I really grew up. That was really a lot of my formative years were in that 2010s era of rap. But there's no denying that towards the top of the game, there was a lot of same stuff happening. There's no real denying that. But I also want to say this. Don't get me wrong, because the 2010s was super creative, and that is still the most creative era of rap. As an era as a whole, that's still the most creative. But there's no denying that once you reached a certain level, you kind of had to assimilate. You kind of had to get with the program, let's just say. Now, in terms of like the underground stuff, everything was going crazy. There's so many new eras and waves of rap that came in the 2010s that really just came out of nowhere. They didn't necessarily take down the charts, but they were there. So don't get me wrong, that still existed, but there's no denying that we kind of need some new blood at the top. We need some new sounds. We need some stuff coming out that sounds like these regions of America that really represent us as rap and rap culture. And I think that that's what we may be headed towards with what just happened with GNX. I think we might get a lot more Homerism coming back, and we might be getting the rebirth of regions really rising to prominence with their own sauce again. And I do want to end this video off, though, by saying shout out to Atlanta, because, man, they had a run of dominance in hip-hop that I don't know if it will ever be matched again. Like, that the Atlanta scene from, like, the end of the 2000s towards really, like, 2 years ago, you can't really match that anywhere in hip-hop. I don't think any other real region of hip-hop has done anything like that. Like, maybe you could say New York in the early years of rap, like the 70s and 80s, but that doesn't really count because, like, that's when rap was, like, just getting its feet wet, like, just now starting off. It's kind of like saying, you know, Bill Russell's the GOAT because he won 11 rings, but he was playing against, like, 8 teams. There were only 8 teams in the league when he won 11 rings, so it doesn't really count. Like, New York did their thing, don't get me wrong, but I think Atlanta we have to appreciate for just the run of dominance that it's had in hip-hop. And who knows, maybe it doesn't end, maybe it just changes, right? Maybe this new Cardi era and what Opium is doing becomes the norm for everyone in hip-hop, but, you know, who knows, right? That's just speculation. But that's going to be the end of my video. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know down below in the comments. If you want regions to really come back like they were really doing back in the 90s and 2000s, let me know down below in the comments. But if you made it this far, I greatly, greatly appreciate you. Make sure you have a good day. Be safe, be blessed. I go by the name of Pay. Peace.